Dr. Levice, Dr. Broussard, good morning. To everyone who are now watching and listening to what we will have to say, to all of those, good morning. But to my five panel members, it's such a joy meeting you. I have met you through the internet. I have met you through documents. I've met you in that fashion, but Troy, I know you personally. But I just enjoy meeting my five panel members. What I would like for you to do is to introduce yourselves and to introduce your organization. But now I want you to do it. But before I have you do it, let me remind you, I'm a retired criminal court judge. That's who I am. And I roll like one. And so you're going to have 2 minutes to both introduce yourself and to introduce the organization. And so I'm looking at you in this order, and I'll start in this order. I'll start with you, Ms. Ricks. Good morning.
Good morning, Judge. I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with you and all the panelists. My name is Terry Ricks. I serve as the Deputy Secretary and Executive Counsel for the Department of Children and Family Services. I am a proud alum of Tulane Law School, and I'm excited to be able to be on this panel to share with you some of the work that we are doing, but also the problems that we see. And so we're excited about having the conversation together. I also once served as the General Counsel for the Louisiana Housing Corporation, or LHFA, when I was there. And with that comes a lens of seeing the big needs that Louisiana has. And today I'm excited to be able to talk to you about some innovation that we are tapping into called the Unite Louisiana Network, and the employment and training programs that DCFS has started over the last couple of years and gone to another level of trying to help people truly wrapping around and understanding what their needs are and not marveling at them, but trying to actually do something about it. Treating people holistically when they come to us instead of giving them the one thing that they reached out to us for. We are undergoing a complete transformation. Judge Johnson, you will appreciate this probably more than many, of our child support enforcement program, with the emphasis now on support as opposed to enforcement, while still using enforcement activities. That means that we have a lot of apologizing to do to people, especially Black males in the community, who have come to us in fear, sometimes hailed and maybe not been provided services. And yet now we do have an employment and training program and a message that is very different than we've had past. So as we go through this day, of course, we're the SNAP agency. Of course, we're the TANF agency. Of course, we are the child welfare agency. And yet every one of those avenues brings us to the same need for people to find prosperity pathways to lead them to exactly what they want in their life, which is to be prosperous in every way.
You know, I hear and feel your passion, and hopefully we'll see and hear more of that as this time unfolds. Dr. Jones.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to have this conversation with all of you. Judge Johnson, thank you for leading us and moderating us in this conversation today. I am the Director of Workforce and Development at Thrive New Orleans. We provide wraparound services, affordable housing, workforce development, small business development to individuals in the city. And right now we have been selected as the operator for a contract with the City of New Orleans to offer green infrastructure training, stormwater management training to individuals in our city, as well as offering CDL and technology training. And so we are focused on working with citizens who are returning from justice-involved situations. We are committed to working with those who have major challenges in the city. And we have identified and looked at all of the ways that are showing best practices around the country to bring to the residents in our city that we know that so deserve to have all of the supports to be able to compete in a very, very tough environment. And I'll say that, and I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Jones, thank you very much. Mr. Warland?
Hi, thanks very much for having me. It's really an honor to be included in this conversation and in this symposium today. So just want to express my appreciation for being included. My name is Chris Warland. I'm the Director of Field Support at Heartland Alliance. And Heartland Alliance is an anti-poverty and human rights organization that's headquartered in Chicago. We are over 130 years old and provide a wide range of services in the Midwest and also internationally. And so the kinds of services that Heartland provides include far more than I could name here, but they include things like refugee resettlement, legal assistance to immigrants, housing, healthcare, other employment services, social services, and the direct services that Heartland provides are really varied and numerous. But I work in a division within Heartland Alliance that focuses on research and policy and systems change. And so I have the privilege of doing national work. I support communities around the country who are working to provide access to quality jobs and earned income to people who have been excluded from labor markets and excluded from economic opportunity. And we do that work at the programmatic level, at the systems level, and at the level of public policy. That includes work specifically on behalf of people experiencing homelessness, people with prior criminal legal system involvement, opportunity youth, and other people who are experiencing barriers to employment and chronic unemployment. So once again, thanks for having me. Pleased to be here.
And thank you, Mr. Warland, and all of those who are watching this. In the chat, there is a piece you can click on for more information about each of our panel members. So please do so. Ms. Joseph.
Hi, good morning. Good morning to each of you. And I'd like to echo Chris's sentiment in it is a distinct honor to have been asked to participate in this panel discussion. Again, my name is Shannon Joseph. I have been rooted in all things workforce development here in the state of Louisiana for a significant amount of time. I've had the pleasure of serving as Assistant Secretary of Labor here with Louisiana Workforce Commission. I've also served as Director of Workforce Development for Ochsner Health, and I currently serve as the National Director of Nursing Workforce Pipeline for Ascension Health. Very excited to have conversations around what needs to happen to connect individuals to purposeful, gainful, sustainable employment. I've had the distinct pleasure of being able to work in this space with connecting folks to healthcare, which has been very rewarding for me in that they are finding opportunity and pathways that they had no idea that they were able to even connect with. And the idea of those particular opportunities changing and saving lives for generations is something that I think we're all charged with having an impactful role in. So again, excited to be here and excited to have the conversation.
Thank you very much. And I'm excited to hear all of this conversation we're going to have because it's going to be all the way live. Mr. Glover.
Yeah, and I'm also excited to be here. Thank you all for having me. I can't start any introduction without saying I'm a New Orleans native and graduated from what we all know to be the best high school in the city, McDonald 35. Senior High School, and folks from New Orleans will understand and appreciate that reference. I am the New Orleans director for a social enterprise organization called CEO. What we do is we provide immediate employment for folks returning home from incarceration. We launched in 2019. I came on as the founding director in 2019. In the past year, we've hired about 150 folks, and out of the 150 folks that we've hired, only 2 have recidivated, which I am most proud of, and the work that we do. We hope to serve about 300 folks this year. I've spent time at the Juvenile Public Defender's Office working on policy and youth engagement, served as the co-chair for the Ending Mass Incarceration Committee for the DA's transition team, and I'm also on our new sheriff, Sheriff Susan Hudson's transition team as well. I'm excited about this conversation. This conversation is a personal one for me as a New Orleans native and someone who was impacted by the criminal legal system at the age of 17, and know and understand the resources needed to really help our folks move forward. So I'm excited about the conversation. Johnson, thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's get it started. This is first question. The field of public health, in the field of public health, economic and social conditions that influence health status are referred to as the social determinants of health. Conditions such as access to health care and a quality education, quality housing, living in a safe neighborhood and physical environment, and the experiences of discrimination. Are there equivalent social determinants that influence employment? If so, what are they? And again, I'll start, Ms. Ricks, with you. You're muted.
Yes, thank you. Me and the mute button, we still don't know how to do this. Sorry about that. So let me just say that social determinants of health is a very interesting term. And it basically gets us to the point of understanding that if anybody is missing any of Maslow's hierarchy of need, they're not going to be healthy, emotionally or physically. They're likely not going to be able to learn, even if they were in a great education environment. And yet we know that they're not great education environments. And so what I'd like to say is that in the work that we've been doing in the Unite Louisiana network, which I will talk to you about at some point, connected with Job One, one of the things that we're seeing is that almost everybody that comes to us needing employment assistance also needs assistance with housing, transportation, and and many of them have problems with childcare, and then they also have an education needs. And not only do they need a job, but they also need a HiSET, right? Or some equivalent. And so for us, we have to realize how expensive it is to have a job, to be employed. How you've got to have money in order to get to a job. You've got to have transportation, and we're lacking on those things. And so the best thing that we can do is to make sure that we are tied together, working on behalf of people together, and not making people access siloed services, and which basically makes up, half of their day, half of their month. It's almost like a second job of just trying to access the number of services that it takes to actually function if you're poor. And so I'm going to tie everything down to housing and say, no one looks for a job without understanding what the school looks for a job, looks for housing. What's the school like in that area, whether or not I'll get that house, right? And so housing is at the core of all of this, in my opinion. And we have got to figure out some solutions to bring both money, other resources, understand the racism that has been, indigenous to all of this, and really bringing resources to wrap around people and doing it together. So I can talk about this a lot, but I do think that there's an important aspect of whatever we do is we've got to do it together, and we've got to be able to be accountable for the work that we're doing with people and for them, and making sure that we're not doing anything to them, but doing it with them.
So work together, be accountable, recognize it all impacts people.
Yes.
Dr. Jones, what about you?
Oh, sorry. I totally agree about working together. I just find that the level of stressors, when there's so many levels of stresses that people have to deal with, and the barriers to get to a job and stay employed in a job. I talk to people every day, and they're so leaning in on, I want to work, I want to do this. And then there are these pervasive attitudes that exist out there that say, those people are not committed, and they don't have a work ethic, and they're lazy or whatever. And I'm sitting in front of people who are like doing everything imaginable to get to employment. And it's unreal how individuals get over so many barriers just to be able to get to a program, to be able to try to help them connect then to a job. So I would say the stressors that come from the lack of having access to housing security and food security, and the ability to be able to pay bills and be in a relaxed environment so that they can show up in a job. But I'm also going to come back to the race piece and just acknowledge that there are power structures that are in place that control jobs, and that the closer you are to those power structures, that jobs become more accessible to get to. And so that I don't think that we can acknowledge what happens around race and racism, and then the pervasive attitudes that the people have that are in control have toward Black and Brown people about their commitment to work. And then the daily microaggressions that then happen on the job to be able to stay in the job. So the slights that happen, being marginalized on the job. I hear this saying, and I hear people say, I'm tired, I've been Black, or I've been brown all day, I'm tired, So it's like those microaggressions where while you're balancing life and work and all those things, and it's just all a lot. And then I'll just say the thing about what happens in the educational system. Are we really setting people up to succeed in the work life? What is the mindset that we're preparing people to have that attitude of can I do it? Building that self-worth, that critical thinking aspect. Because even when you have all these institutional systems in place that are beating you up, beating you up, if you have that mindset to be able to overcome and have that grit to be able to maneuver your way through these challenges, then maybe employment and sticking to employment and all of that, it just becomes, I don't want to say an easier thing, but a thing that we can do. And I have a PhD, and I hear my friends all day, we're all challenged with jobs and work life. So I'll just say that. But so that's some of my thoughts.
Dr. Jones, race matters, no question. and however, through all of that, there are kids, there are young people, there are those who come out that succeed through all of that.
That's good.
For those who are just tuning in, we are talking about how the social determinants determine determine employment, or for that matter, unemployment. But how do social determinants determine employment? Mr. Warland.
Yeah, so I think that, when we're talking about the determinants or drivers of unemployment, in addition to, yes, absolutely, racial discrimination in labor markets and in, all of the other systems that kind of feed into labor markets is really a critical factor. And, as well as criminal legal system involvement and, the inequities that feed into that system and the outcomes from that system as well. What I kind of want to talk about right now, though, is trauma as a driver of chronic unemployment, because, people who have experienced trauma, particularly we know this from the adverse childhood experiences studies, people who've experienced trauma have far worse employment outcomes than people who haven't experienced those multiple traumas. And so when you're talking about individuals who have experienced racial discrimination over the course of a lifetime, that's chronic trauma. People who've experienced poverty over the course of their lifetime is chronic trauma. And then there are all of these acute traumas that come along with those experiences as well. So, the experiences of, things like evictions or community violence or, the incarceration of a family member, like all of these traumas, right, are cumulative and have an impact on people's success in the labor market. And, that trauma shows up in workplaces in ways that, an employer might interpret as, an attitude problem, for example. So if somebody's experienced trauma, they might be withdrawn or dissociated or seem disinterested. They might lash out or have kind of like what get perceived as disproportionate responses in stressful situations, or they might just have trouble concentrating or following through on tasks or following directions. And an employer might look at those behaviors and say, well, you just don't want to be here. Or you're not a good worker, right? When in fact, what they're observing is a response to that trauma. And so I think that it's really, really important for those of us who are working in workforce development, as well as those of us who are employers, to recognize that, worker trauma is really, really prevalent. So like 60% of adult workers will self-report having experienced a traumatic event, but in fact, that number is a lot higher, and it's much, much higher for people who have experienced poverty in their lifetimes. And so that's one thing that I'd really like to call out for this discussion.
So here we are, trauma matters, race matters, how these entities, how these pieces connect one with the other. All of it matters, Ms. Joseph.
I could not agree more. Trauma is absolutely one of the drivers that we have to combat in understanding how folks are able to associate and assimilate in culture of an organization, just like any other situation that they encounter. We can train individuals through didactic presentation, and they can be excellent at the skill in which they have. But the challenge comes in with the application of those skills. And those application points are absolutely influenced by all those things that Chris talked about. Because when we come to work bringing our whole selves. We can't, that the whole thought process of you leave your problems at home, that's not realistic. When you come to work, you bring your whole self to work. So there are missed opportunities when we don't stop and recognize that we're talking through different lenses. So finding that middle point, finding that balance and that agreement, that point of agreement, is what is going to help us overcome some of those pieces. So Chris, thank you so much for that, because I think that is essential in the conversation on today. One other thing that I'd like to talk about, Terry talked about those pieces around health, understanding that that is truly a social determinant of whether or not individuals are able to become employed, maintain employment. One piece that we don't talk about a lot stems from that trauma and other pieces around mental health. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about how my state of being will help me understand what resilience looks like. Tanya talked about when I go to work, I've got challenges. How do I figure out how to get through certain problems? How do I even identify that it's a problem? And the resilience is needed to be able to overcome that. And all that comes with how we think and feel about ourselves and the people who are around us. And it's important to note that working and being employed is not just about income. It's not just about providing for my family. Yes, those things are 100% why we need to be gainfully and sustainably employed. However, work also is a place of dignity for us. So it goes back to Terry's comment about Maslow's law. I've got to feel good. That gives me dignity to be able to create, to be able to produce, and to be effective in my work environment. So all of those things are pieces that we have to comprehensively take a look at. It's not one or two different points of interest. It essentially revolves around that whole person and how do we attack that, the challenges and finding the solutions for it.
Wow, Ms. Joseph, thank you very much for that. Mental health matters. Lord knows you know mental health matters. Health matters generally. Mental health matters, obviously. Trauma matters. Race matters. Troy, it's on you.
Yeah, and what I would add to that, I think it's been a very robust conversation, is that these things don't exist in a silo, right? These are all systems that our people exist in and are told to thrive in. The point I would want to add is that, one, we have to do a better job at creating a more inclusive environment for folks when they return, when they do get employed. And then two, in a city that industry is built around hospitality and tourism, it's tough for folks to get jobs that are making a livable wage. And those social determinants matter. In New Orleans, where we have, the city set out to create over 7,500 units of affordable housing over the past 5 years. We created 1,200 units, right? So when you don't have a space to live, stay, rest your head, it's tough to be able to stay at work. And we know in the city, I think over Black families, 50% of Black families make $26,000 a year. And that goes to the point of actually being able to get a job that you can actually take care of your family. And the last thing I'll say is that we love New Orleans. I think most of us love New Orleans, but the reality is New Orleans is a very tough city to live in. When you have kids, over 50% of kids live in poverty and experience violence directly, that matters. And that plays a direct role in whether or not folks are able to stay employed, get employed. And the last piece is transportation. I don't know if you've ever ridden a bus in this city or tried to ride the bus in this city, but you can't get to work if you don't have transportation. And New Orleans does a poor job at providing reliable public transportation in a city that's one of the highest rates of folks that don't have cars. And so we have to remember that these problems don't exist in the silos. These things exist in the systems that keep people down.
We've talked about though these social determinants of employment. That's what we've been talking about again for those coming in just now listening to this. And so we're going to drill down some now with this conversation. This is for all five of you. Black men have the highest unemployment rate in the city of New Orleans. What social determinants present the greatest barriers for Black men? I said it 3 times. Troy, you can answer first.
Yeah, I think the two for me would be, one, criminal justice, and two, this narrative around how we see Black men. In Louisiana and in New Orleans, 1 out of 3 Black men have been impacted by the criminal legal system. We know if you have any intersection with the criminal legal system, it's hard for you to get a job. And then in Louisiana, overall, we have about 600,000 people that need access to expungement. And if you don't know what expungement means, expungements mean removing your record from the public. In Louisiana, we have 600,000 people that need access to expungement yearly. Most of them are Black men. In New York, the state of New York, there's about 600,000 people that need access to expungement. New York is a lot bigger than Louisiana. I think that just highlights our criminal legal system and knowing that most of them are Black men. And the second piece for me is just around public narrative. There's not a lot of positive attention, media attention, around Black men. So when we look at Black men, when we see Black men faces, it's usually negative around committing a crime, a mugshot, etc. The work that we've done needs to continue to push the narrative, public narrative, media narrative that highlights some of the successes that's happening around Black men, that highlights some of the wins that we're having around Black men. Because I think when we start to move to a point where society just doesn't see Black men as violent or thieves or criminals, that start to change the narrative, and we see Black men in leadership positions. And the last piece I'll say around that is that we don't have the safety net to fail. Right. So when you look at nonprofit as an industry, there's not a lot of Black men led nonprofits in the city, when the majority of the population that we serve are Black men. So I think when considering all those approaches that matter, and that's part of the overall work that we need to do.
Troy, thank you. So we have three things, and you started with a thing that I used to do, mental health. I did that too, but criminal justice and the impact criminal justice has on this population we're trying to serve. Also, how the media talks about it. You really encapsulated that. Ms. Joseph.
I love that Troy brought up those pieces around the criminal justice aspect of things. Terry talked about it earlier when she offered what is happening with her agency around helping those individuals who have had challenges with child support. It is absolutely disheartening sometimes when you can have a conversation with an individual who we know is ready and primed for employment, but because they were behind on child support, ended up in the court system, now they're challenged with being able to secure that employment. That's probably one of the most disheartening pieces about working in that space. I think another piece that we have to consider as well is representation. It's unfortunate that we have not seen enough representation of African-American men in certain career fields. There are certain pieces that we're accustomed to. If we begin to have conversations around construction or manufacturing, those things make sense to us as young people. But for a young African-American man, a young child, to be able to see the representation of an African-American man doing other occupations, I think it is not only enlightening, but it's life-changing because it encourages them to say, yes, I can absolutely do that. I want to speak directly around healthcare. We don't see enough Black men entering into healthcare. Part of it is because we believe, I don't want to be a doctor, not understanding that there's so many other opportunities within the healthcare sector, whether it be nursing, whether it be some form of allied health, or even in the same industry, but doing things that are relative to IT and the like. So representation absolutely does matter. That awareness that there's other opportunities besides those things that we just see when we're riding down the street is important for us. And I think as business leaders, as leaders within our community, we are charged with offering that type of awareness to individuals so that they can make informed decisions.
Being visible, that is having for young people to be able to see people who doing these varied kinds of jobs will get their minds fixed on other kinds of things they can do. Mr. Warland.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, to everything that's been said so far. You know, the one thing that I would add on the topic of, you know, job seekers with prior system involvement is that there's a really important and critical public policy piece that needs to be addressed in that realm, right? I have colleagues at Heartland Alliance who work on our public policy team who lead a coalition that's focused on ending what they call permanent punishments, which sometimes also get called collateral consequences, which are legal prohibitions or other, you know, kind of laws that are on the books that prohibit people from participating in certain professions or industry sectors. And in Illinois, there are hundreds of these laws on the books. And I would be surprised if Louisiana were any different, where there are so many different occupations or occupational licenses or entire industry sectors that are effectively off limits to job seekers that have a record. And so it's really important to address those. And in the case of Illinois, my colleagues are not trying to address them piecemeal. They're trying to address it through like an omnibus approach where we're able to remove all of these or many of these permanent punishments, in like sweeping legislative changes. And so, if some of them, I mean, in most of them or all of them really, really make no sense. There's no real good purpose for these prohibitions to exist from a public safety perspective or any other perspective. They just don't work, and they're unnecessary. And so it's important to focus on making that necessary policy change as well.
So we're talking about social determinants and how they present barriers to Black men and employment is what we're talking about. And public policies have such a great impact in terms of Black men and their employment ability. Dr. Jones.
As an educator, and somebody that's just been so committed, and I appreciate everything that everyone's saying, and I have to look at those early formative years that really form an individual's life, and what happens to people in those, the schooling years. And my mind takes me to the school to prison pipeline, which, I know Troy has mentioned some about the criminal justice system, but how young Black boys are criminalized, pathologized, just pushed out of the system at higher rates and into disciplinary action in schools, and just targeted early on as if they are the problem. And also the high rates of being put on, labeled and put on medication with being considered ADHD, all of those terms that give you a label that you have to move through the world that say, I am a problem. There is something wrong with me. And as I see the media shows me that I am a problem. There's no representation of me in these other fields. What is that? I'm being targeted and geared toward going into the hospitality industry. No disrespect to the hospitality industry, but maybe I didn't finish my high school or my education, and so I'm kind of being pushed to a job with minimum wage where I have to piece together lots of jobs to potentially get one quote unquote good job that might not even really be a quote unquote good job, because it doesn't have real benefits that come along with it that really help me to build the foundation to be successful in the long term, to be able to build generational wealth or just wealth for myself or my family. So I just think that there's a lot of issues, and I a place where young people spend a lot of time is in school. I mean, our homes definitely have a lot to do with it as well, and our schooling situations do as well. So
how we educate people, how we look across that reality in terms of early childhood education and the impact it has on the issues we're talking about. Ms. Ricks.
Judge Johnson, I would like to add to your list of blank matters, and that would be that fathers matter, fatherhood matters. And one of the things that I would love to be able to add to that is that what we have research shows us that even where mom and dad are not together, that if a father is actually connected to that child by even, paying child support, we see that someone actually sees their child more, and that there's more togetherness of mom and dad as parents for that child. Now, that's why I started off with that in our initial conversation, because we know that in some ways the system has been in the way. The system has been a part of and party to all that has been stated here today against men, especially men of color. And so I just want to add that we want to be able to provide an opportunity that is a real opportunity, removing barriers from people being connected with their children without being scared to go to jail if they connect with us. We want to actually bring services to them and be a part of the solution, and become a face in the neighborhood where people will understand that whether you're a non-custodial parent or a custodial parent, that we want to help you through the system. We want to bring you to your child, and we want to see all fathers and mothers connected to their children. So I just want to add parenthood, and in this case, fatherhood matters, and we want to do something about that.
Absolutely. Fatherhood absolutely matters. Now, all of those watching and listening to this, what we've done is we've talked about social determinants in terms of employment. We've talked about specifically how those determinants impact Black men and their ability to be employed, again, specifically in the city of New Orleans. The next question is, what are the impacts on the community, for this community, the city of New Orleans? What are the impacts when people face these types of challenges we've described and struggle to find employment or are unable to stay employed? What are the impacts? Ms. Ricks, I'll start with you.
Thank you. If 35% of your community is at or below poverty, you're and it costs to work, but you can't get there, then the economic impact of the community is that you're not using 1/3 of your people's talent, abilities, all the ingenuity, everything that God created in them is not being a part of the wonderfulness of that community. Opportunity matters is what I'm going to stop right there, because I know that you got some other words to come.
Opportunity, Dr. Jones, matters. What happens to the community as a result of unemployment, as a result of these things impacting Black people? What happens, Dr. Jones?
Well, you're not using your whole labor force, right? I appreciate that. And then we're not able to recruit new industry because the industry wants to make sure that there is a workforce here to to take on the jobs that there are. Of course, we know that people become desperate. Desperation causes particular actions when the things that aren't happening. So, of course, we know crime goes up, prison rates go up, people get caught up in systems. So there's less rehabilitation or things happening for people once they have been put in the system. Most incarcerated situations do not provide a beautiful situation for people to get access to true rehabilitation. There are some things in place, but you're still having to come out and recreate community support system, familiar systems, all of those things. It just continues to divide communities. We're still more and more divided. People are just distrustful of one another, you know. We need each other. We have global crises happening. We have real things going on in this world right now. We have climate, we have pandemic, we have war. So this is a time when we have to have real conversation right now about really supporting people, getting all of our gems polished off so that people can really engage in real work at this time. So it matters a lot. And I'll just add this too. The division of the haves and the have-nots is massive. We are watching billionaires become, 100 billion billionaires, right? We're watching the Elon Musk and all of those with wealth. And it's just like really separating and really squeezing those that don't have, so it's a real problem and a real conversation and like real actions and solutions. I'm glad we're here to talk solutions because it feels like we have to act, we have to act now. So
what I heard was, and maybe all of you will correct this, but that unemployment may have an impact on crime. I didn't know that. Maybe
sure.
our rest of our audience need to really, really drill down on that one, unemployment. But anyways, Mr. Warland.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the community level impacts are huge. I believe, and I think there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that, all of these challenges that we see that are being experienced by low-income communities of color are preceded by and driven by economic divestment, economic exclusion, job loss, and that the solution to these challenges in communities is economic reinvestment and the introduction of quality jobs and the availability of quality jobs to the residents of those communities. And so, if we recognize that the lack of jobs, the lack of quality work, the lack of income is, a primary driver of these problems, then the solution has to be, kind of like affirmatively and deliberately providing those quality jobs and economic opportunities in those communities. And, specifically, a lot of the work that I've been involved in recently is around community violence interventions. And there's an increasing recognition that employment has to be a part of the response to community violence. And in fact, we're designing and implementing programs now in Chicago that integrate access to jobs, access to employment as a critical component of that intervention in conjunction with things like supportive services, housing, cognitive behavioral interventions, and other supports. But we recognize that employment just has to be a part of the solution because a lack of employment is a critical part of the problem.
Wow. Ms. Joseph?
I'll just briefly say there's two things that come to mind. In order for us to be prosperous, we have to be healthy. In order to be healthy, we have to be prosperous. It's all cyclical in nature. And the one thing that coming from the healthcare sector, I'd like to really talk about as it relates to finding that workforce that Tanya talked about and that Terry talked about. If we don't have availability of employment and health insurance, it weighs. And secondly, if we don't have individuals who are trained to work in healthcare, to deliver those health services to patients and the like, we also have a weight on our community. So we have to be healthy to be prosperous, and we have to be prosperous to be healthy.
And being unemployed leads to that lack of prosperity and therefore that lack of health. Interesting. Troy?
Yeah, and I'll be quick because I know we need to move to audience questions, but I'll say two things. One, I think at a very human level, we are losing Black men and boys. And at some point throughout this process, that just stopped mattering. But for me, that matters a lot. It cost us about $77,000 to incarcerate a person in OJC per year. What if that money was reinvested into ensuring that folks don't go back? And the work that I do, I've been able to really bridge the gap between government and government's investment into public safety. We have $1 million contract from the city of New Orleans that our forefooted say that, Mayor Cantrell, if we care about public safety, let's really invest. And with that $1 million, that money goes directly to hiring Black men and boys and women too, right? And that's why I can say over the past year, hiring 125 people, only 2 recidivated, right? Because we know when people have access to employment and basic needs, it matters, right? And I think that's just an example about how when we actually invest the resources that we need, we can see different outcomes. But it takes a holistic approach in order to do that work. And it takes us all being on the same page.
So 2 recidivated, 150 was employed, 2 recidivated.
Correct.
And Troy, what is the general, if you can give this stat, recidivism rate in Louisiana? Do you have that data?
I don't have that. I think the recidivism rate in Louisiana is, I think, around 40% roughly or higher. And we also know that if you had any interaction with the criminal legal system, you are likely to recidivate, right? And the work that I do serves the hardest to serve individuals. We don't restrict per crime. I have folks that's done 30 years, 40 years, folks that's done 15 years, 10 years that get out and would not be able to have access to employment. But we know that's just such a critical piece in helping folks return back home and being a thriving member in society.
So there is a connection between criminality and employment, and those who come out of the legal system, who come out of that system, have that tendency, that is that possibility of returning. Yet you say you reduce that possibility from 40% to 2 out of 150. Ms. Ricks, I'm looking at the chat, and you put in the chat a piece about DCFS. Could you talk a little bit about No Wrong Door and about how Unite Us is getting at some of the issues that are prevalent?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think there was also something in the chat about anyone encountering hiring barriers where individuals fear losing their federal benefits, so they request to reduce their workday or hours to keep their benefits while still being employed. So I'm going to take them both at the same time, if you don't mind.
Please.
What's so important to us is that we begin to understand that everybody deserves to be able to sit down and look at their financial situation and make good decisions. So you and I will sit down and make decisions about how much we give. Is it going to put us in a different tax bracket? And so when a person sits down and determines, like, okay, if I lose my SNAP benefits because I take this 50-cent raise, then it's not going to benefit my family overall. That's a very good executive functioning decision to make. What that means is that we have got to have jobs that actually pay a living wage, so that people are not having to make such a decision. And it also means that those of us who are helping people have got to recognize where our policies are getting in the way. We have these conversations with the federal government multiple times a year about programs whose goals do not line up with each other. And what ends up happening is someone's dealing with the benefits cliff. So we've worked with the federal, what is it? The Fed, Atlanta Fed. There is now a cliff tool that a person can sit down and determine, okay, I'm going into some employment and training. Let me make some determinations as to how many stackable credentials, how long is it going to take me to get to a point where if I get a CNA job, then the next one, that's not going to get me out of poverty. It's going to be a job, but it's not going to get me out of poverty, right? Then I can get another credential on top of that one. How long will it take? And then maybe those of us who are creating policy can bridge that journey. Well, how do we do that? We are working through 211, where you can go and find, services in the community. And through our partnership with 211, they have brought on for the state of Louisiana, for the Department of Children and Family Services statewide, our ability to participate in the Unite Louisiana network. So what does that mean? Troy, I think you guys might be using Unite Us in a sliver of your programming, but if we're all using it, here's what happens. I can actually track, I can send a referral to Troy's group or Tanya's group, right? I can send a referral. I can actually see whether or not Mr. Brown, who I sent over to your organization, actually did some work with you and where he is. He doesn't have to tell his story completely from the beginning, because the information is in there. And we now have the data in the system to show us what else did Mr. Brown need that we don't have. So if we don't track people, what actually helps someone, what helped someone successfully, if we don't track where are we missing actual services that are needed for people, and if we don't track, is that nonprofit actually working? Did DCFS actually do their job? Then we're not going to have the accountability that our neighbors deserve when they say, yes, please help me. When they have been courageous enough to step forward and say, I need help with this. And we can all together help them actually get there. So we are therefore working with the Unite Louisiana network, which is Unite Us, 211, and other partners in the community, to say, hey, let's work together on behalf of our clients, our neighbors, and let's also be held accountable to the way that we serve people. So we started rolling this out earlier this year, and it's going to be the whole year rolling out. So it's not going to be all together right now, but with you, we want to work with you and with others in the community to make sure that people are getting the treatment they deserve.
Okay, we are obviously running out of time. But just quickly, how can organizations like Ms. Jones, Dr. Jones, and like Troy, how can they connect? How can they do it? Organizations like those, how can they do that?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to put it here in the chat for everybody, because if you are a nonprofit, it costs you nothing to become a part of the network, and anyone who wants to. So I'm going to put it in the chat so I don't take up the space, and know that I can be reached at any time for anybody wanting to partner. And the other thing that I'm going to say is that in our employment and training programs, there's opportunity to get reimbursed for any dollar that you're spending. 50% of that back if you're serving someone who's on SNAP. There are a SNAP employment and training program, basically an uncapped amount of federal dollars. So we want to talk to those of you who are working with training and employment to wrap around and use those SNAP dollars to help do that.
This question is for Mr. Warland and for you, Ms. Joseph. What can employers do to help support the success of employees who face barriers to workforce participation? What can employers do, Mr. Warland?
So, the first thing that comes to mind is that poor job quality and low wages are, I think, real issues when it comes to chronic unemployment and poverty, right? A lot of times we put would-be workers in a pretty untenable situation in which the available jobs are inadequate with regard to helping them meet their basic needs. And so, you have situations, as have been mentioned today, in which there might be a job that's available, but it's inaccessible unless you have a car, and the job doesn't pay enough to allow you to acquire and maintain a car. Or there might be a job that's available, but the scheduling is so unpredictable that it doesn't allow you to arrange for childcare and doesn't pay enough for you to pay for childcare. And a lot of times we lay these barriers at the feet of the job seeker and really don't provide the appropriate level of pay and job quality that would allow them to actually, meet their obligations as an employee and thrive within our economy. And so I really do think that employers should look at the quality of their offerings and think about how, the quality and wages of their offerings impact the lives of the workers, and whether or not it allows people who are experiencing chronic unemployment to actually meaningfully access those jobs. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The other is, as I mentioned before, employers need to understand how trauma shows up in the workplace, and to provide, management practices and policies that respond appropriately to worker trauma and avoid re-traumatizing workers that have experienced trauma in the past.
Ms. Joseph?
Absolutely. So this whole process really should be a partnership between the employer, the job seeker, education, and absolutely those nonprofit entities that are able to provide comprehensive assistance. An employer can take several different roads to get to the end, but one specifically I'd like to mention is in the way of registered apprenticeships. This is an opportunity for an employer to be able to train an individual exactly the way that they need this person trained to meet their needs within their organization. But what it does, it allows individuals to earn and learn at the same time. So now you have an opportunity for this person to learn a new trade, learn a new skill, but be able to learn and take care of their families at the same time with an equitable wage. These individuals are also placed in a situation where they're going to receive incremental increases in pay to get them to a journeyman level at the end of this training program. Within that training program, not only addressing those pieces around education, but going back to what we talked about with the support services, as well as those opportunities to gain critical reasoning, critical thinking ability, as well as emotional intelligence that's needed to function well within an organization based on that organization's culture. So in essence, what we're doing is allowing an employer to be able to grab hold to an individual, give them everything that they need to be successful personally and professionally. The only way that that person is not successful is something has to happen that they themselves determine, this is not good for me. We've got to partner together to be able to have that foundational piece for them to be successful. And once they've gotten a lift up from that particular platform, the height in which they can attain the pathways that they are afforded, it's up to the employer to lay those out as well. So we may essentially have an individual that comes into a healthcare facility as a patient care technician, which is frontline. And that person gains access to these registered apprenticeships and these customized trainings. And before you know it, this individual could be the next nurse practitioner. And it is not something that is not possible. It happens every day. But we have to make the commitment as an employer to be open to work with all these other stakeholders so that we all can come together and do the work that we do to make that robust impact and change within the community.
This has been such and is such an enlightening experience, both for me and I know based on what I'm seeing in the chat and based on what I'm seeing on these questions for those who are listening to us. There are questions here, and I'm looking at, Ms. Ricks, you've answered some in terms of chat because they were for you, but I'm looking at one, and I think it may pertain to everyone. This is the question, what do you think about changes to high school curricula to make jobs-focused education available to all students? And Dr. Jones, you were saying something, I believe, about that. So I'll go to you first for an answer with that, for that question.
Our schools have learned that everyone does not have to go to college to be successful. and that there are more jobs-oriented career technical education programs that are being implemented, that we're seeing a lot of success in 1 year and 2 year programs that really launch people. I mean, you could talk about coding, it takes a particular level of skill potentially to get to a coding job, but you can get to do coding and get to an $80,000 job fairly quickly. So yes, I do agree that we do have to put our attention on careers, careers in technical education as much as higher education. I think they're both, and it's really important that people get an opportunity to quickly get to jobs that pay a living wage, and that they don't wind up heavy in debt, so that they're always living out, trying to just get over and pay debt, and not be able to get a job that is equal to being able to pay the level of debt that they may have gotten themselves into in a potentially expensive higher education situation. So
we have about 3.5 to 4 minutes left, and the powers that be is informing me of that. That's how they roll. But Troy, how can folk contact you specifically as regards your program and as regards the population you serve and that population getting directly to your program?
Yeah, so you can go to, and I'll put in the chat, you can go to ceoworks.org. That's the website. We're a national organization. I run New Orleans and Louisiana operations. And you'll find email and contact information. And we're literally always hiring. As soon as if you know anyone that need access to a job, you can just
in the chat. Troy,
yeah,
put it in the chat so everyone will see it. Ms. Joseph, how can people contact you? How can people get your care, your assistance, your help, if in fact they need it and desire it?
Absolutely. I'd love to have conversations wherever possible about this work. Please feel free. I'll put my email address here in the chat if that helps.
Please do so, please. Mr. Warland, you look across those big swath of America, and now you're looking at New Orleans. How can people get more in touch with you, more in touch with Heartland in terms of what you do and how you do it, and get some of that assistance here in the city of New Orleans?
I will also put my email address in the chat, and anyone is welcome to reach out to me. We can talk about all the different ways that we might be able to support you and your communities. We also have a resource library that's full of free resources, toolkits, best practice guides, all related to workforce development for people experiencing barriers to employment. And so I will get the link to that resource library and put that in the chat as well. And I welcome any contact or inquiries from anyone here today. So thanks.
Appreciate you. Dr. Jones, put it in the chat, please, in terms of how they can get to Thrive and how they can do stuff with Thrive and how you can help, again, the people we all serve, how you and Thrive can do so. Ms. Ricks, you've done a lot of that, and you really have. I want to know more about Unite Us in terms of how, again, these entities that I serve in New Orleans, and I'm on several boards, how they can connect directly with you and with Unite Us. And I would appreciate it if you would, well, you don't have to do it. I'm gonna do it myself. I'm gonna contact you directly and ask you about how to do those things. We are at that witching hour. Y'all, we have 30 seconds left. I really appreciate all of you. I really do. I have learned so much. And Dr. Levis, Dr. Broussard, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I really appreciate it. To each of you, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Nice to
you
meet
so
you
much.
all.
Yeah,
It's been real, y'all. There you go. Take care.
you too.
Bye-bye.
Take care.